Hi, Dan.
Hi, Chris.
All right. Well, yep. I'll cheers to that. Drink local. I just gave away my location. I'm located in the very pinpoint location of Michigan.
Use your hand.
Yeah.
No, don't.
I carry 2 maps with me, guys. Also 2 guns. Oh wow! I did not prepare for that, but
that's all right. Well, what are we doing today?
That's my question. I'm glad you asked. Dan, what are we doing today? I feel like it has something to do with one of my favorite things. Well, one of my favorite things to look at in one of my favorite things. That's very
We're going to talk about some conceptual gauge design, product stuff for automotive in Cinema 4D and Unreal.
Because you actually have a lot of experience in this world as far as just creating the I don't know what you even call this stuff, the heads-up displays in the center console. I don't know what all these terms are. Is that close?
Yeah, all the UI, the UX terms, the MoGraph terms. Yeah, we can walk through it, but just digging into a lot of automotive work that I've done, and this project is more conceptual, based off of some of the work that I've seen, projects that I've worked on. This idea kind of came to my head a while ago, and it seemed like something I wanted to flesh out, so I did, and here we are.
Yeah, and I have to say I've seen a little bit, and it looks great. I would definitely pick these gauges in my car. It feels nice.
We'll hack your Tesla and we'll put them in there.
Yeah. Oh man, half the crowd just left because you said Tesla. Dang it.
I mean,
yeah,
American-made car.
It is American-made.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, all right. Well, what do you want to show? Let's take a look.
So 3D gauge concepting. Got the case study up. This is kind of my Cliff Notes, but I'll walk through. I did 2 of these. I'll give you a quick sneak peek. First one that we'll go through is kind of a 3-dimensional take on a classic circular speedometer. It's used a ton. Yeah, it's just kind of a classic gauge with a new take on it. And then the second one that we'll dig into, if I don't kill this thing first, spatial design. So my background before I got into motion design and digital design and all that stuff was in architecture. So I kind of went back to some of those roots and started thinking about this spatially. So it's going to be fun. So we will kick off the first one. I'm going to play a video. You guys can watch this, and then I'm going to kind of go through like how this began, the thought process behind it, and then start digging into the nuts and bolts with cinema and whatnot. So enjoy.
0 to 25, like an old lady. Oh, here we go. 85, 90. This is my ride to work right here. Oh yeah.
So this is actually based off of an EV gauge. That was the starting point. So yeah, I'll go through the background of this, of why I did this, why anybody should care, or at least why it's important to me, and how I got there. So start with some reference. Pulled up on the old Pinterest. Did a lot of work with designers, and really where this started was a lot of this was just flat design, which it, I can't like dog on it or say anything bad about it. There's loads of things that make this amazing. I just wanted to try it a little differently with some different rules. But some of the process that we were dealing with was, with this design process. Oh boy.
Oh boy. Are you sitting back too? I can't. You faded a little bit in DB level.
Did I?
You need to scoot up to your table a little.
Sit up
to the table while you eat.
Like almost in my mouth at this point.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, just kind of show some of these. I just noticed a lot of similar trends. A lot of the work has historically been done in, a while ago, Photoshop and Illustrator, but Sketch and Figma are the big ones. But it just all lends itself to vector work. And after watching a lot of designers work on this stuff, it would start in either Figma or Sketch. And then once the design was complete, it would then be passed off to be animated. And so once it's animated, we bring it into After Effects. And where I struggle with After Effects is it's a dead end because you can't take After Effects and then push it into development. You basically are just showing how it animates. You're showing your intention of what it should do, and then you have to hand off assets and pray the developers can do it. And almost every time it gets pushed back because it's just not designed in the way that the system is meant to be. So you can see a lot of these. They replicate, they mimic the old style gauges, the analog gauges. So what I wanted to do was say, like, okay, we went through this process. I animated it. We give them comps. We show them how it's done. And then at one point, it's like, okay, well, it's actually more efficient if we build these in FBX. So then we're actually converting these things to a 3D format, and it ends up getting. It's just so like painfully far removed by the time you're getting to this finished product that's actually like going out to the public. So to me, it's like, well, if we just kind of started at the endpoint, like if we're starting with FBX and we're starting with a set of 3D rules, how would I approach this differently, or how could this be done differently if we just started there instead of starting all the way back in Sketch or Figma and taking
Yeah.
it through several steps? So
You
that's
you've
kind of the
talked
backstory of why I started with this.
Yeah, and you've said to me before too, even specifically like building things in like Octane or Redshift, which is, I mean, specifically, you can't like replicate that stuff for the limitations of the end deliverable in a car with that computer system. But like,
Yes.
do you face that even with specifically After Effects type stuff? Like, I mean, very 2D stuff. Like, what specific things would that be? Like limitations
So
there?
yeah, so 2D and 3D. Wish I had a little diagram in front of me, but whether it's done in, like, rendered in Octane, or and, you could make a gauge like this, you could do it in Cinema 4D, you could render it in Octane or Redshift. The problem is the finished product that comes out the other end is still like an image sequence, which is already, like, fairly bloated on file size, and you can't really deviate from the image sequence. You can kinda scrub forwards or backwards, and that's about it. And then usually with these systems, they're not like this massive machine that's powering your car. Like they're only so strong. So you got to be really mindful, which kind of gets into more of like a game design mindset. You got to be really efficient with texture memory and file sizes and draw calls and loads and all that stuff on the system. So yeah, like I've seen some of this stuff. Like you could do it in Octane, you could do it in Redshift, but yeah, it's still it kind of hits that endpoint where you can't really do anything. It's still just intent that they hand off, like, here's a set of images to some poor schmuck who has to rebuild this thing in a 3D
Yeah,
system and try to
yeah.
match it. And
Wasted.
to me, that's just kind of like it's just not fair. If somebody hands you something in Octane and then say,
Yeah,
"Hey, like design this in a limited version of something like Unreal or Unity," it's like, oh, that's too bad. So yeah, I started making these things in Unreal just because one, I like working in real time environments. To me, even if this thing isn't built in Unreal, or if only parts of it may be built in Unreal, the real time environment's going to be a lot similar to whatever the end environment's going to be, whether it's something like Kanzi, Altia, or whatever the other ones that are floating around out there. This gets pretty close. Even Unity, I think Unity's getting into some other vehicles like Mercedes or whatever. But
yeah,
yeah, so that's the background of this. So this to me was more of a design challenge. I just wanted to see, like, how would this be different? How would I approach this differently? So instead of looking at stuff in flat space, so instead of like hexagon color, I would look at things in terms of material. So it's not like gray with some highlights, like it's steel or it's chrome or gold or copper or fabric or whatever. So it has all these uh physically based properties that kind of dictate motion and how it feels and all that stuff. 2D instead of 3D. You can scale stuff and try to mimic the illusion of depth when you're animating flat planes and stuff. But then I wanted to start looking at it like, okay, and instead of using stroke, how could I use depth or thickness of geometry to create different effects, and instead of stroke. And then ultimately, instead of using gradients to try to make something look like it's lit, I actually have the benefits of using light and shadow. And that's one thing I've seen a lot of designers do is like they really are working hard to try to mimic these light effects. And then once you go to animate it, it's even harder to try to do it then versus if you just put a light on it and the
Yeah.
system kind of handles
You know,
itself.
this conversation that happens all the time with graphic designers that don't have 3D experience or
Yes.
working with someone with 3D. It's
Hmm.
like, um, it's like I almost feel bad, like to educate them on what can be done, um, so quickly in like a real life environment. The way light bounces and works, and even talking to like just about like it's been interesting, like just talking about like, hey, can you change the color on that bevel or this thing, or this or that, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, but just think of a light or a color working in real space, or they're pick whipping things,
Yeah.
not pick whip, what do you call it? Spot selection, or I don't know.
Eyedropper or
Yeah,
whatever.
the eye drop. They're eye dropping things, like, well, this is the brand color, and it's not correct. Like the heck, and I'm like, yeah, that's because I. It'd be similar to you printing it on a business card and then looking at it in real life. That's what we're looking at here. It's
Yeah.
actually looking better. So it's interesting. There's a whole education process there, that I've experienced in how it's better and more realistic. But
Yeah, and that kind of leads into a further discussion, which might be a good topic for a different, longer format. But design systems are kind of a big discussion right now, especially for like 2D, like vector stuff. Motion design systems seem like they're starting to make a rise. I've built a couple of those, but I'm starting to see more of those pop up on like Medium or other spaces where people are talking about kind of the next phase of design systems. But I still haven't seen anything as far as like a 3D design system. So like you're saying, how would you have a set of rules like this is our brand Pantone color that we use? Okay, well, if we're starting from 3D or if we're adding light or something, to it, how do those rules start to change and how do you think about this stuff differently, which would actually be a great
yeah,
discussion.
I've had those discussions at work, and then I've reached out to other studios or other places, for like 3D brand guidelines, and it's like, yeah, those don't really exist. So I don't know that a lot of places have them, unless I'm saying this and it's evidence that I'm very sheltered. But I've been looking for it, so it's definitely a conversation
I
because
haven't seen anything that gets as detailed as a design system,
yeah. Well,
which would be
they talk
cool.
about it as if like there'd be handicaps, and I'm like, well, yeah, I get that that's a slippery slope. You don't necessarily have the same guidelines for film or photography that you do for graphic design. It's a little more open, and so it kind of
But they
fits
will
into
make
that realm.
photography guidelines and they will make,
They
video
do, but they're a
guidelines.
little more open. It's a different conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
Which is, I mean, which goes back to this project. I mean, with this, I'm like, all right, well, if I had just a different set of rules to start with, how would we do this differently?
mhm.
So, yeah, kind of digging into some of the elements of this gauge, which I'll pull up in Cinema and kind of show everyone in a minute. But historically, kind of going back to this, I'd zoom in if I could, but you start looking at like you can see how they're mimicking light fall off around this gauge. You have a gradient that comes down that makes it look like it's glowing or these things are emitting light. And you also have stroke width, thickness, and stuff like this. So these are like major things that you're going to use to compose something like this. What I started looking at is okay, if I'm looking at the camera and we're kind of staring top down on this thing, um, how would I make something that's the equivalent of a stroke thickness and, using gradient with light fall off? So the inspiration that I had was I looked at jet engines, especially like fighter jets where they start wide and then they actually like taper inwards when they get ready to create more pressure and push out. So that was kind of the inspiration of how I looked at building this thing. And I'll actually show you guys some of that. You don't see it as much in here, but we'll dig into Cinema.
I like that. I like this even more, Dan. I think we're
Good.
even better friends now.
That's right. You're gonna like this then.
Jet engine.
Um,
This car is already dangerous. I'm not allowed to buy it. Whatever car this RPM gauge is in.
You should buy it anyways. So let's see. I've got a camera that gives me a top-down view, and you have to, use your imagination on some of this until we get into Unreal to really see it. But yeah, I started kind of tapering this because you can kind of see this little flat plane or disc or whatever it is that's up here. I basically use the taper to actually build this in. So it's tapering in towards the top, which is actually giving the illusion of stroke thickness, but then it's still catching the light differently, which as I animate all this stuff gives it very unique effects, which I like. So I kind of went through and started playing with the taper, and I would export these things out. But like I said, similar like a the jet engine, I could do whatever I wanted with this. I basically would kind of just adjust this in to taste and kind of keep updating my files as I would export this out. But if I wanted to, like I could do, morph targets and actually animate this as it's speeds up. So as power increases, the gauge increases, you could actually animate these things to open and close. And as you're shining lights on them, it does all sorts of uh, fun stuff that gives it a nice effect. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's basically what I made in Cinema. I didn't spend loads of time in here. I kind of blocked the elements out and then started playing with the rest of it in Unreal. But you kind of see I built this platform with a few steps, and then I wanted these to power up. So like battery consumption or brake regeneration. So I wanted to have two independent um, lines that I could do, but you don't really see them as much from the top. But what they're doing is they're actually kicking light out the side, so it'll start to build up in this area and give it a different effect. So let's dig into Unreal.
Very nice.
So this is where I spent most of my time. I animated this out in sequencers. So as you can see from our case study, I put together the promo video that you saw. Usually, if I'm pitching this as a design, I'd like to try to get the camera down in here and kind of show some different pieces of how this is built, how it's behaving. So when you get up top to look at this, you have a better understanding for what's going on. And then as you change the behavior, you get an idea of how the visuals are going to change with it. Um, so kind of just scrubbing through this. I wanted to build this out in like a startup sequence. So, say you start up the vehicle, what happens? And then once you kick into ignition, how does that work? So, this is kind of mimicking some of that stuff. And even just here, just showing some of the patterns and the textures that are being put on the base, these gauges that are showing up and lighting it up, and just kind of some detailed elements that show how this thing is actually being built. And maybe something's grouchy there. And then, yeah, actually just having 3D text in here showing speed and how this stuff builds. I don't know what's something's crabby about it, but whatever. So fly in here. I think a few notes on this guy. A little dark. I'll go into unlit just so we can see. So cameras aside, like I said, you can see these platforms here. You can kind of see some of the texture material that we're using. This is our material pack. I used it on a few of them. Actually, there's at least 3, if not more. But I liked the effects that I got from these, and I was able to swap these out and kind of play with them, and I had a lot of fun. And most of this stuff is a mixture of some alembic format, but I think with the bulk of these, I use the material masking. So we'll link a tutorial to that one that we've already covered. But basically building out these individual pieces where I've got whatever this is, steel, or let's take a look at it. Speed. What do we have here? So 2 gradients and yeah, just a basic base color and then metal roughness. So I'm just kind of using these basic materials and then actually masking off the emissive qualities in there. So they're actually casting light. So, Chris, you always know how I like glowy things. This is part of the
Here we
reason
go.
why. The glowiness, cast the light. And I kind of just replicated this for a lot of the other pieces. So I've got back into camera view. What are we at? Cine 5. Let's go with we'll do the angled one. So this one wraps all the way around, and this would basically be like 0 to 140 or whatever your max speed would be. But then I've also got two gauges on the side that animate up and speed 02. Maybe get a better view. Okay, so this is more what I was talking about with stroke witness thickness. So I've got those tapers that I showed you in there, and they're basically just covering up another light. So as I open those or close those, it makes this look like the stroke is widening, but really it's just showing more of the light. So it casts more of that light out to kind of illuminate this surface. So yeah, in here you could see this would be, as you accelerate in your electric vehicle, this is showing your battery consumption. So you're max consuming as you're accelerating quickly, and your speed continues to rise. And then when you get to regenerative braking, now this kicks up into the green as your battery's regaining charge because it's using the friction or whatnot. And the only other one, I'm gonna stop there. Do you have any questions before I get into blueprinty stuff?
Uh,
And that
no,
was a
I guess hmm. Um, so I feel like you're talking about things at a very experienced. I'm kind of just in awe, like from a very experienced point of view, like just the way you're using like that taper to mimic like a jet engine, and then like you're talking about things that I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen that in my car and in other cars, and I feel like you've done. So I'm just like kind of stuck in awe. I don't know. Maybe like is
should
this
probably
like
elaborate on the gap maybe a little bit between like what has been done, because like a lot of this stuff too, like I'm not really pulling it all out of my butt. Historically, if I was going to do this for work, they would say like we need all of these things in here. I kind of just picked a few of the very basic ones.
yeah. I guess
um
I'm just saying like I don't know. Talk to like I feel like you've learned a lot over the years and come all I don't know how I say years. I don't know. It could have been days. I don't know. I don't know how many projects you've done. I know you've done it for
uh,
years. So I don't know. How did you get to where this becomes very intuitive? I guess I don't know. That's just what kind of what I'm thinking. Like I said, I'm just kind of stuck in awe with how this is
so
like building on top of what I've seen. And
so I actually have the luxury a little bit of, I mean, I did some reference work. Let me see if I can find a quick example that's gonna look a little bit better. Like this one focuses heavily on navigation, but it's like you have your odometer here, you have your speed here. Um, yeah, some of these I've just kind of looked at like, okay, here's let's try EV. See if we get something. This is probably not bad. This is similar. Yeah, and even this just looks like a conceptual design. But
Mhm.
usually, yeah, you'd have fuel, um, your odometer, your speed, and I just look at a bunch of reference just to get my bearings of what are the basic gauges, what do I want to cover, and then yeah, like I said, a lot of it is just line. So you have stroke, you have color or fill, and gradients. And I basically would say, all right, well, if it's a color, we're going to swap it with a material, whether that's just a solid color, emissive, unlit. I guess just plop a link to the other materials video there. But it's like here's the selection that I have to work from. If it's yeah, I mean anything flat, I try to apply Z depth to it or shape to it and just kind of pull things forward in my mind or push them back into space.
Mhm.
And then anything that would be a gradient. So when I'm looking at some of these things and I'm saying this gradient fall off here. Okay, well, this shouldn't be a gradient. This should be a light. How would I make this with a light? So what I did is like I made a disc. I put an emissive material around it on the outside, and then I put another disc or ring or whatever it is on the inside to catch the light. So basically, as I pull that taper in, it looks almost like a gradient stroke mix, but the light is shining on it, and I'm just revealing more of that to the camera angle. And those are the basic rules that I just had in my mind as I did this, and I just applied them throughout and just kept working piece by piece.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just I guess it was mostly a compliment and then just set up to talk
Oh,
because
thanks.
it's using your favorite thing, the glow, but then it's also combination of your experience, and it feels very organic and not like, well, once you, I feel like the first time I do this, I'm like, wow, I can do all kinds of stuff. And, boom, 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 boom. And now that wouldn't be, this feels like a real gauge, because the gauge I would make would be like major distracting, and people would get in car accidents because it's like, look at all the cool things. I don't know. So it's just interesting. I don't know. Did you iterate a lot in Unreal? You kind of came up with your concept, and then you kind
That's
of
a
like formed it a little bit here because you had the liberties too.
Yeah, that's a valid point. So I guess from a design perspective, yeah, I started with other reference and stuff that I was actually seeing in vehicles and trying to keep it very simple. Because to your point, I'm like, yeah, I could have had like trees flying around everywhere. And, like as the speed picks up, the wind starts blowing all over. But yeah, I mean, it'd be
Hmm.
distracting, it'd be confusing. It's definitely not the path of least resistance to, comprehend the data that you're trying to get.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, no, that makes sense. Oops.
Anyway, interesting. You asked for a question, and I was like, I don't know. I'm just sitting here like this looks cool. So that's it.
Um, Okay, so I'll go into the other part, and then we can move on to the next one, just so this isn't taking forever.
Yeah.
But the other piece it's in here is this platform. I kind of showed it in the boot up sequence, and we cover this in another one, but I wanted to have this kind of chain together. So I'm a big advocate of making my tools. So what I want to do is have this from 0 to 100%. I don't want to keyframe these one after another to build up. And there is a tutorial where we cover blueprints of how we range map these things. So I can take one slider and just slide it up and then slide it down, and these will animate. And I pretty much made this blueprint into two pieces that I mirrored. So I use the same asset. And I'm using lights because, as you can see, lights tend to, whoops, see if I can access my light. Let's open the blueprint. Let's kick out light better than emissive materials do in here, uh, which seems pretty straightforward. This probably isn't going to be the most helpful, but I built this construction script, and like I said, we show this again, but I basically have these set of controls that illuminates one light through this range, and the next range it illuminates the next one. But I played with emissive light, and it just got really noisy. It was pretty weak. Lume okay with it, but it didn't render very well. So I added lights on top of the emissive materials, and they're kind of working together. But the emissive materials kind of really add a little extra illumination on this edge, but the lights are kind of hitting the side as these go up and down. Let's see, I've got this animated. Yeah, so let's see. Light gauge have this variable that I exposed, and you can see I animated it and keep framed it here, but I can start at 0 and then just build this whole thing up. Hide that so you can see a little bit. But yeah, I pretty much is just kind of playing. Like I could get down in here and start looking at the how this worked with the material and this up and illuminate the gauge. And I don't know. I had fun with this because if I was trying to stare at this or wherever, it was just more dynamic. I could have a lot more fun and control with it. And instead of motion kind of being not an afterthought, but like step two, it was built right into sun, and between the design of the elements and the motion, it kind of formed this behavior to make this whole thing. So yeah,
I
let's move
like
on to
it.
the next.
Feels like an exercise of what's the word? Like just restricting yourself, or whatever. But it looks very. It looks like it's just the beginning of potential for what you can do. Going back to the beginning, you can't come anywhere near this with strokes and gradients.
Yeah, it's difficult, and then trying to animate this and then translating that into code, it's a challenge.
Hmm.
So we'll go to the next one. This one's a bit more wacky. Okay, so like I said, we covered like flat design and then making that into 3D, which is almost kind of like a 2.5D treatment. This one, I see work that I was inspired by, but I was trying to think of this really taking Z depth to a different level. And let me see if I can find one of these that's got more of a container on it, like this guy. So you've got this screen that's kind of sold in this space and it fills it out. And you can see some of this light kind of hits the edge and you can get some different effects with how it does. But all this kind of lives within this housing. So instead of it feeling, kind of flat, and these are scaling outwards to kind of give it this illusion of infinite depth, I started looking at this as if this was a building or like a diorama or something. And play this video, and then I'll kind of start dissecting it from here.
Are you a grown man who loves video games and hates driving to work? Do you wish you could combine video games with your drive to work
Yeah.
legally?
Yeah.
Well, have we? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me more.
And if we got a heads-up display for you, you can
It's
buy
so
this
gamey.
for a small fee of $99 a month for the rest of your life.
Someone's
Anyway,
gonna write
sorry.
that down. Uh, yeah. So this fun shiny video game one. Yeah, like I said, I started looking at this as if this was like a building. I kind of took this rectangular screen that I would see behind the steering wheel. And if your steering wheel kind of arced over to the top, like where would your tachometer be, speed, gear, and then some of your instrument panels in here. And I just started carving away at it. I took a flat surface and I started stepping down. I played with the void and kind of pushing stuff forwards and backwards and just seeing how light would fill these space. And even just this is kind of my blank canvas. So your fuel gauge, it's almost like a pool. But this is some of the reference that I looked at. Like if you had this and just started receding geometry and pulling stuff back and then shining light through these different things. I did all this stuff in college. It was fun. Uh, Still probably glad I didn't go down that path, but a lot of this still I do. But yeah, like even this is just the fuel gauge. It's more like a pool with a light, like just this sunken container, and just kind of kept carving stuff out. We'll come back to prototype.
It's impressive. I'm impressed. I love the backstory on this. It makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people that I mean, I don't know if anyone really went to school for motion design, a few, but it's pretty new. But usually someone's done something else that before they get into this point. Chris, you're another one of those people. But it's like you have a lot of experience that you can pull from that just kind of makes you view the world a little differently than somebody else. And that's all I did with this. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard all those guys talk about nobody's retired from motion design yet. I mean, probably getting close.
well, I think there's some people who don't want to do client work anymore
Yeah.
because they're tired, and I get it. So it's a good place to stop. All right. So the says don't mind that. That's just the blueprints that I built. And I'll show that in just a minute. But I have a render version, and that shows up as text just because. Actually, we'll just tick it off. I've got a construction script version of this, and this is how I make my working tools. So the event graph, this is the exact same thing as a construction script. I've started to nest these into functions. So I only have to edit it once. Like I don't have to copy and then paste it over here. And if I make a change, go back and forth. Kind of like a pre-comp at that point. But this is basically it. I've got this 3D piece of text. I've got materials on the front and the sides, and then it's black in the back. But I can swap all of these. So I could turn this to a light if I want this to shine light behind it and hit a surface. But since I want it to be like a black void, I just kept it here. And then I just changed it when I got out. So this guy, same as before. It's just an animating one, but you can kind of see like in this deep void of a space, I'm using this text to kind of cast light on the top and bottom and start making that motion. So For example, if I was to do this in After Effects, say, doing this for work or client or whatever, you'd have to like duplicate your pre-comp and then mirror it and then try to like blur it and do stuff to create a faux reflection effect. And it still never quite comes across like you want it versus I can just make this material and adjust the roughness to taste. Same with gear, same kind of thing. And then with the rest of this, a lot of just material reveals. So see, tachometer, I kind of simulated shifting gears and going back and forth. This one would be a combustion engine. Um, but yeah, how does stuff kind of cast light and move around? So I dampen it and adjust it to taste. Yeah, you can kind of see when I get down in here, I started with this main plate and then cast the light on, move the shadow. So this kind of shows the form. And then when it boots up, all these pieces um, cascade out to reveal. And I've got these steps going down to kind of catch the light and draw the eye over and transition from this platform space. And the platform really, it starts flat, but I kind of view this as like a blank canvas. So icons could come and go, and you could basically just cut the space and make whatever you want. Um, so this could be, whatever your drive mode if you want snow blowing and there's snow all over ice and you're showing how the vehicle performs differently. Could be a giant wheel show higher pressure traction. I mean, it could be the weather, or I don't know, need for speed or whatever you want to be. But kind of the flexible space here, and that's going back to the architecture, flexible use, mixed space here, and then more dedicated space over here for stuff that's always ever present, speed and gear and stuff like that. But that's this one nutshell. Glowy stuff in different levels of space and MoGraphy stuff.
I love it. I just kept thinking, like, you talked about the architecture thing and alluded to my background, whatever. It was just like video production, film, whatever. But interesting perspective on like how someone may watch this and think, oh, I want to make one of these, or anything for that matter, and just how we bring our experience and
Yeah.
our choice, taste, whatever, to something. I think you did really well with it. I don't know. I like this too.
Thanks.
It's really cool.
And one note that you kind of figured there, and I like to try to refer these back to how this incorporates to like job or career, anybody who's looking into this stuff. Um, I would consider myself like a 3D motion designer. That's kind of where I've landed. But like a lot of people will come from graphic design and then they start animating. I got to this of building this thing because I never studied graphic design. I read some books, I researched a lot of it. I am by no means a type nerd. I feel like I know enough to do a job and get by, but 3D has kind of been my stronghold. And this just kind of gives me a different take on what this could be. But I know a lot of people that do this stuff start in graphic design or they come from web design, UI, UX, and then they just kind of have their own taste and their own style that they mold over time. Like I said, I came from architecture, which went to 3D and then animation and then real time and so on and so forth. So I kind of landed with this based off of what's being used, what technology is there, and what some of the design problems are. But I don't know, anyone who's not formally trained in this stuff and gets a little overwhelmed, like I don't know, like Chris, to your point, if you get into 3D and you have zero background in photography or video whatsoever, you're probably going to look at things a lot different than if you're coming from understanding how lights work, how a camera works, and how, shutter speed and movement and all that stuff plays in together. You just kind of approach the problem a little differently.
Yeah, for sure. I just had a dumb thought. I'll just talk about it
I
because I
like dumb
don't have
thoughts.
anything else to say right now. But I thought about, what about somebody who comes from child cartoon like illustration? And I imagine this whole
Oh,
thing being like a little playground of color and like characters that like run faster or something, or spin their wheels on their bike. So yeah,
you
someone
could
go make
totally
one of
make this
those.
a hamster and a wheel, and
Yeah, someone who
that
comes
actually
from yeah,
for I don't know, like an Easter egg mode or something, like a
yeah,
dumb theme. I'm like, I'd actually love if I had a hamster spinning on a wheel and the speed picked up. I'm like,
Uh,
Sure. I'm in a mood today. Let's load that one up.
yeah, that
Which
sounds
if
amazing.
anyone makes a hamster and a wheel speedometer, please share it. I would love
Please
to see
tag
it.
it. Yeah, tag us. Well, cool. This is awesome. Thanks for sharing. I don't know what
So I
else.
got I'll throw some links in there too, but I threw this up on a Behance post that just has all my thoughts in order. So that's how I think through stuff. But yeah, like I said, any comments you have, please reach out. Love to continue the discussion, or if there's stuff you guys would like to see. We're always looking for ideas of what people are interested in and how we can keep pushing stuff.
Yeah, and I think I hit the right button there. Yep.
You
Oh my
did.
goodness, you look like a blurry mess. That's going to be the joke. I don't know what happened, but oh yeah, and like you alluded to a few times there, there's tutorials on some of these specific things that you covered, um, kind of honing in on some of those things, which I think are awesome. So go check those out for some more details on that. I don't know what else. Leave a comment, like it. Let's start a conversation. Until that's it.
That's
Till
it.
next time.
Think you did this before? We're gonna do finger
Yeah.
pistols.
Oh yeah. Till next time.